June 11, 1962. A quiet night surrounded the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. On a small island covered by concrete walls and steel doors stood the most famous prison in America, Alcatraz. For years, people believed Alcatraz was impossible to escape. The prison had a simple reputation. If you entered Alcatraz, you stayed there. The island was surrounded by freezing water, strong currents, and more than a mile of open sea separating prisoners from freedom. Even if someone escaped the prison building, they still had to survive the dangerous journey across the bay. That was why prison officials believed Alcatraz was the perfect prison. The walls were not the only thing keeping prisoners inside. The ocean was the final barrier. But on that night in 1962, 3 prisoners would challenge everything people believed about Alcatraz. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, John Anglin. Before sunrise, their cells would be empty. Their names would become connected to the greatest prison mystery in American history. And decades later, one question would remain unanswered. Did they die trying to escape? Or did they actually make it to freedom? Alcatraz Island had a long history before it became a prison. The island was first used by the United States military because of its strategic location. Sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, it provided a perfect position to defend the city. But in 1934, the island changed forever. The United States government transformed Alcatraz into a federal penitentiary. The purpose was clear. The government wanted a place to hold the most dangerous criminals in America. During the 1930s, organized crime was growing across the country. Gangsters, bank robbers, and violent criminals were becoming national headlines. Law enforcement wanted a prison where these criminals could be separated from society. Alcatraz became that place. The prison was designed around strict control. Every prisoner had a routine. Every movement was monitored. Every cell was inspected. Guards counted prisoners multiple times every day. The rules were simple. Follow orders. Stay inside. Do not escape. Throughout its history, Alcatraz held some of America's most famous criminals. One of the most well-known was Al Capone, the Chicago gangster who arrived at the prison in 1934. But Alcatraz was not created to make criminals famous. It was created to control them. The prison became known as the Rock, a place where the government sent prisoners who had already proven difficult to handle. Many inmates had escaped from other prisons before arriving at Alcatraz. That was the reason they were sent there. Officials believed Alcatraz could stop them. The prison had armed guards, watchtowers, steel doors, strict security procedures. But the biggest defense was something nobody could build or break: the water. The waters around Alcatraz were extremely dangerous. The temperature was often cold enough to cause hypothermia. Strong currents moved through the bay. The distance to the mainland made swimming almost impossible for most people. Officials believed that even if a prisoner escaped the building, nature itself would stop them. For many years they were right. But history has shown that even the strongest security systems can have weaknesses. Before 1962, several prisoners attempted to escape Alcatraz. Some tried to climb fences. Some tried to overpower guards. Others attempted to use boats. Most escape attempts ended quickly. Some prisoners were captured. Some were killed. Others disappeared but were never confirmed to have escaped successfully. The prison remained undefeated until 3 men began planning something different. They did not plan a violent attack. They did not plan to fight their way out. Instead, they studied. They watched. They waited. They looked for weaknesses. And the person leading this dangerous plan was a prisoner named Frank Morris. Frank Morris was not considered an ordinary criminal. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1926, Morris had a difficult childhood. He spent much of his early life moving through foster homes. As he became older, he turned to crime. His criminal history included burglary and armed robbery. But what separated Morris from many other prisoners was his intelligence. He was known as someone who could think carefully and solve problems. He understood systems. He noticed details. He looked for opportunities. Before arriving at Alcatraz, Morris had already escaped from other prisons. That history was one of the reasons he was sent to the Rock. Alcatraz was designed for prisoners like him. Men who had already proven they could escape. But prison officials did not realize something important. Frank Morris was not finished trying. Inside Alcatraz, he began studying the prison. He studied the guards. He studied the daily routines. He studied the structure of the building. And eventually he found 2 people who shared the same goal. 2 brothers who also wanted freedom: Clarence and John Anglin. The Anglin brothers came from a large family in Georgia. Before their criminal lives, they worked ordinary jobs. They later became involved in bank robbery. Their crimes eventually led them into the prison system. Like Morris, the Anglin brothers had experience trying to escape custody. They understood the risks. They understood the consequences. And inside Alcatraz they became part of a secret plan. The three men were different. They came from different backgrounds. They had different criminal histories. But they shared one thing. They believed escape was possible. Together they would begin preparing for a plan that would take months to complete. A plan that required patience, creativity, and secrecy. A plan that would eventually expose the biggest weakness in Alcatraz. The prisoners were not trying to break through the front door. They were searching for a hidden way out. And behind the walls of America's most secure prison, their escape had already begun. Inside Alcatraz, every prisoner had a routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, or return to the cell, sleep. The same schedule happened every day. To the guards, it looked like nothing unusual could happen. But hidden behind the normal prison routine, three men were secretly preparing for one of the most daring escapes ever attempted. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin knew they could not simply walk out of Alcatraz. The prison was too secure. The guards were too alert. The island was too dangerous. They needed a plan that depended on patience. Not strength. Not violence. Patience. Their first challenge was finding a way out of their cells. And that required them to discover something most people would never notice. A weakness hidden inside the prison walls. The cells in Alcatraz were built with concrete walls. Behind the walls were ventilation areas that connected to the outside of the building. The prisoners noticed that the concrete around the ventilation openings was not as strong as other parts of the cell. This discovery changed everything. The men realized they might be able to create a passage behind their cells. But there was one major problem. How could they break through the wall without guards hearing them? They could not use loud tools. They could not create obvious damage. They had to work slowly, quietly, and secretly. The solution was creativity. The prisoners created homemade tools using materials available inside the prison. They used everyday objects and modified them into tools that could slowly remove pieces of the wall. The exact details of every tool used are still discussed by historians, but investigators later found evidence that the men had spent months secretly working on their escape route. Small pieces of concrete were removed over time. The holes became larger. And behind the walls, a hidden pathway was slowly taking shape. The most incredible part of the escape plan was how long the prisoners were able to hide it. For months they worked behind their cell walls without being discovered. During the day they acted like normal prisoners. At night they continued their secret work. They understood that one mistake could destroy everything. A guard noticing a damaged wall. A suspicious sound. A surprise inspection. Any of these could end the plan immediately. So the prisoners created ways to hide their progress. They placed objects in front of the damaged areas. They covered the holes. They made the cells appear normal during inspections. The escape depended on one thing. Nobody could know what was happening. But escaping the prison building was only one part of the plan. The men still had another problem. The island. Even if they reached the outside of Alcatraz, they would still need to survive the journey across San Francisco Bay. Swimming was extremely dangerous. The water was cold. The currents were powerful. A person could become exhausted before reaching land. The prisoners needed another option. They needed a boat. But they could not simply build one inside the prison. So they found another solution. A homemade raft. According to the FBI investigation, the prisoners collected raincoats and used them to create a makeshift flotation device. They connected the raincoats together, creating a raft that they hoped would carry them across the water. It was a risky idea. There was no guarantee it would work. But the prisoners believed it gave them a better chance than trying to swim. The escape plan became more than just leaving Alcatraz. It became a complete operation. They needed a way out of their cells. They needed a way through the prison. They needed a way across the water. And they needed to fool the guards. That final part was one of the most famous parts of their plan. The prisoners knew guards performed nighttime checks. Officers would walk through the cell blocks and look inside the cells. If a prisoner appeared to be sleeping, everything seemed normal. But if a cell was empty, the escape would be discovered immediately. So the prisoners created something designed to fool the guards. Fake heads. Using materials available inside the prison, including soap, paper, and human hair, the men created realistic-looking heads. They placed them on their pillows. From a distance, it appeared as if they were sleeping. The idea was simple. When guards looked into the cells at night, they would believe the prisoners were still inside. This gave the men more time to escape before anyone realized what happened. By June 1962, the plan was almost complete. Months of preparation had created an escape route. A hidden tunnel. A homemade raft. A deception designed to fool guards. But there was still one final question. Could they actually do it? Could 3 prisoners escape from the most secure prison in America? Could they survive the dangerous waters surrounding Alcatraz? And could they disappear without leaving behind any answers? The prisoners had spent months preparing. Now they had to wait for the right moment. The night they had planned for was coming. And soon, Alcatraz would experience something it had never experienced before. A prison break that would become a mystery forever. June 11, 1962. The day began like any other day at Alcatraz. Guards walked the prison corridors. Prisoners followed their normal routines. Nothing appeared different. But behind the walls of the prison, 3 men were waiting. 4 months, Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin had secretly prepared for this moment. They had studied the prison. They had built their tools. They had created their escape route. Now everything depended on one night. One opportunity. One decision. If anything went wrong, they would lose their only chance at freedom. But if everything worked, they would become the first prisoners to successfully disappear from Alcatraz. As the night became quiet, the 3 men moved closer to their plan. Their cells were located next to each other in the same area of the prison. This allowed them to communicate and work together without attracting attention. The escape route they had created behind the cells was finally ready. The prisoners moved through the openings they had secretly created. Behind the walls of Alcatraz was a hidden space that few people knew existed. This area became their path to freedom. The men climbed through the narrow passage and eventually reached areas above the cell block. Their next challenge was reaching the outside. They had to move carefully. Every sound mattered. Every second mattered. A single mistake could alert the guards. While the prisoners escaped, their cells appeared normal. The fake heads they created were placed on their pillows. From outside the cells, everything looked ordinary. A guard walking by might see what appeared to be 3 prisoners sleeping. But it was only an illusion. The real prisoners were already gone. This trick gave them valuable time. Time they desperately needed. Because once the escape was discovered, every second would work against them. After leaving their cells, the prisoners moved through the prison and reached the roof area. From there, they made their way toward the water. Investigators later discovered evidence that showed the men had reached the outside area of Alcatraz. They found personal items left behind. They found tools. They found parts of the escape equipment. But the biggest question remained. What happened after they left the island? The prisoners had prepared a homemade raft made from raincoats. The FBI believed this raft was intended to carry them across the bay. But after leaving Alcatraz, the men disappeared. Nobody knows exactly what happened next. This is where the greatest mystery begins. Did the raft successfully carry them away? Did they reach the mainland? Or did the dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay stop them? The next morning, June 12th, prison guards began their normal routine. During the morning count, something felt wrong. One prisoner did not respond normally. A guard approached one of the cells. What they saw shocked them. The prisoner's head was on the pillow. But something was strange. The face did not look real. The guard touched it, and the impossible became clear. It was a fake. The prison was immediately placed on lockdown. The guards checked the cells. They discovered the truth. 3 prisoners were missing. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, John Anglin. They had escaped from Alcatraz. News of the escape spread quickly. The idea seemed impossible. Alcatraz had failed. The prison that was supposed to be escape-proof had been defeated. The FBI immediately began investigating. Boats searched the surrounding waters. Aircraft searched from above. Law enforcement officers examined every possible escape route. The search became one of the largest investigations connected to Alcatraz. But there was a major problem. There was very little evidence about what happened after the men left the island. Investigators found some important clues. A few miles away, a paddle-like object was discovered. A wallet belonging to one of the Anglin brothers was also found in the area. Later, investigators discovered pieces of what appeared to be the homemade raft. But none of these discoveries answered the biggest question. Where were the 3 men? The FBI officially believed the prisoners most likely drowned while trying to cross the bay. The water was extremely dangerous. The raft was homemade. The escape happened at night. The chances of survival appeared low. However, there was one problem. No bodies were ever recovered. And without bodies, the mystery remained. The escape had been successful in one way. The 3 men had escaped the prison. But whether they escaped, their fate remained unknown. The FBI had questions. The public had questions. And decades later, people would still debate the same mystery. 3 men walked away from Alcatraz. But did they ever reach freedom? Or did the ocean become their final prison? After the discovery that 3 prisoners had escaped from Alcatraz, the entire country wanted answers. How had it happened? How did 3 men break out of the most secure prison in America? And most importantly, where were Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin? The FBI immediately began one of the largest searches connected to an Alcatraz escape. Investigators knew time was critical. If the prisoners had survived the journey across the bay, they could already be far away. Every possible lead had to be investigated. The search covered the waters around Alcatraz Island. Boats moved through San Francisco Bay looking for any sign of the missing men. Aircraft searched from above. Law enforcement agencies across the area were notified. The FBI examined possible escape routes and interviewed people who might have seen something unusual. But the investigation faced a major problem. The prisoners had left very little behind. There were no confirmed witnesses who saw them reach land. There were no confirmed sightings after the escape. There was no clear trail showing where they went. The men had disappeared. Investigators focused heavily on the possibility that the prisoners drowned. The theory made sense. The escape happened during the night. The waters around Alcatraz were dangerous. The raft was homemade and had never been tested in real conditions. The distance to land was difficult even for strong swimmers. The FBI believed that surviving the journey would have been extremely unlikely. But there was one thing that kept the mystery alive. No bodies were ever found. In many missing person cases, discovering a body can provide answers. It can show what happened. It can close the investigation. But in the Alcatraz case, there was no final evidence. The 3 men were simply gone. This created another possibility. Could they have survived? Could they have reached land and escaped into society? Over the years, different theories began to appear. Some people believed the prisoners successfully completed the escape. Others believed the ocean took them before they reached safety. The debate continues because both sides have questions. The survival theory became especially popular because of the planning involved. The escape was not a desperate attempt. It was carefully prepared over many months. The men had created tools. They had built a raft. They had planned how to avoid detection. Supporters of the survival theory argue that if they were smart enough to escape Alcatraz, they may have been smart enough to survive afterward. However, there is no confirmed evidence proving they made it to freedom. No official records have ever confirmed new identities. No verified photographs have proven they lived after the escape. The survival theory remains a theory. Over the years, several possible clues appeared. Some reports claimed possible sightings of the men. Some people said they believed they saw Frank Morris or the Anglin brothers after 1962. However, investigators were never able to confirm these claims. Many possible sightings turned out to be mistakes or false reports. The FBI continued keeping the case open for many years because the men were never officially located. One of the most interesting parts of the mystery involved the Anglin family. Years later, members of the Anglin family claimed they believed the brothers survived. They shared stories suggesting the brothers may have contacted relatives after the escape. They also pointed to possible evidence that the men lived longer than investigators believed. But again, these claims have never been proven. They remain part of the larger mystery surrounding the escape. Another piece of attention came from a photograph that some researchers believed showed Clarence and John Anglin alive years after the escape. The photograph became widely discussed. Some experts examined it and argued that the people shown could possibly be the Anglin brothers. Others disagreed and said the evidence was not strong enough. The image created new interest in the case, but it did not provide a confirmed answer. The FBI eventually closed the active investigation in 1979. Their official conclusion remained the same. The prisoners most likely drowned while attempting to escape. But the case was never forgotten. Because one fact remained impossible to ignore. 3 men escaped from Alcatraz. They reached the outside world. And then they vanished. The mystery of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers became more than just a prison escape story. It became a question about human determination. How far can someone go to achieve freedom? Can the perfect plan overcome impossible odds? Or can one small mistake destroy everything? For more than 6 decades, people have searched for the truth. But the final chapter of the Alcatraz escape mystery was still unwritten. Because new theories, new evidence, and new questions continued to appear. And the biggest question remained. What really happened after the 3 men left the island? More than 60 years have passed since 3 prisoners disappeared from Alcatraz. But the mystery of Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin continues to capture the attention of people around the world. It remains one of the most famous prison escape stories in history. Not because we know exactly what happened, but because we still do not know. The men escaped one of the most secure prisons in America. They defeated a system designed to keep them trapped. But after leaving the island, they disappeared into history. The official explanation from the FBI is clear. Investigators believed the three men most likely died while attempting to cross San Francisco Bay. The reasons were simple. The water was extremely dangerous. The escape happened at night. The raft they built was not a professional boat. And there was no confirmed evidence that they reached the mainland. From the FBI's point of view, the evidence suggested the men did not survive the journey. But for many people, the story was not that simple. The lack of bodies created a mystery that refused to disappear. Over the years, many people have asked the same question. If the prisoners drowned, why were their bodies never found? Supporters of the survival theory believe the men may have reached land and escaped. They argue that the prisoners had spent months planning every detail. They created a hidden escape route. They built a raft. They created fake heads to delay discovery. To them, this shows the men were intelligent and determined enough to survive. However, there is still no confirmed proof that they lived after the escape. No official documents. No verified photographs. No confirmed identity changes. No evidence that proves they successfully started new lives. The Anglin family has remained one of the strongest supporters of the survival theory. Over the years, family members have shared information they believe suggests the brothers survived. Some family members claimed they received signs that the brothers were alive after the escape. They also pointed to possible evidence that the brothers may have lived somewhere outside the United States. But these claims have never been officially confirmed. They remain theories. Interesting theories. Possible theories. But still theories. The case received more attention when researchers examined possible photographs and new information connected to the escape. One photograph became especially famous because some people believed it showed the Anglin brothers years after they escaped. If true, it would completely change the story. It would mean the men survived the escape. But experts have disagreed about the photograph. Some believe it deserves attention. Others believe there is not enough evidence to prove the people shown are Clarence and John Anglin. Once again, the mystery continued. One reason the Alcatraz escape remains fascinating is because it represents something bigger than a prison break. It represents the human desire for freedom. These three men looked at a prison considered impossible to escape. They saw walls. They saw guards. They saw an ocean. But they also saw an opportunity. They believed there was a way out. And for one night, they proved that even the strongest systems can have weaknesses. Today, Alcatraz remains one of America's most visited historical locations. Millions of people visit the island every year. They walk through the same cell blocks where Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers planned their escape. They look at the small cells. They see the walls they damaged. They see the places where history changed. And many still ask the same question. Did the three prisoners die in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay? Or did they achieve what everyone thought was impossible? The truth is, nobody knows for certain. The facts tell us this. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin escaped from Alcatraz on June 11, 1962. They left behind evidence of their plan. They reached the outside of the prison. They disappeared.